It is by desires that you humans prosper, and it is your faith that has ruled you. Considering that, can you really call me evil? This chilling line from Netflix's Castlevania perfectly encapsulates the essence of dark fantasy, at least to me. Dark fantasy is an amazing genre, and one which is very popular to readers today. But world building for it holds some pitfalls, especially in the ending of the tale. Why, you ask? That is what I want to talk about today. How to create dark fantasy stories and the challenges they bring to the table for the world builder. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. First, we need to talk about what dark fantasy actually is. The genre of dark fantasy is defined as a world of greys, where characters grapple not just with the concept of good versus evil, but also with what it means to be good. It incorporates disturbing and frightening themes, and frequently combines fantasy with elements of horror, or has a gloomy, dark tone, or a sense of dread. If you break it down to the basic level, dark fantasy usually has some kind of horror element, and villains and heroes alike are shades of grey characters. Is this really popular? In a word, yes. According to the giant fantasy survey that I ran, it is the third most popular genre, trailing only adventure fantasy and epic fantasy. Dark fantasy achieved a 60% like ratio in the survey, far outstripping grimdark, which languished down at 31%. Okay, so it's popular and it's horror. What's so hard about that? Well, let's plunge into the Netflix show Castlevania and discuss the highs and the lows of dark fantasy world building and plot. Fair warning, this episode contains massive spoilers for the whole of Castlevania. If you're not up to date, go watch it and then come back. All good? Okay, let's go. There are three main elements to dark fantasy, and I believe that Castlevania exemplifies how to create these elements and how to unfold them for the viewer or the reader. The first element is shades of grey. You almost cannot have dark fantasy without this. Your villain needs a believable reason, a tragic backstory. Your heroes need to leave the audience with doubt about their motives. Let's take a deeper look at our main Castlevania cast, especially how they are introduced, and see how they fit this trope, starting with the villain of 2 seasons. Vlad Dracul Tepes starts as a tragic figure rather than a straightforward antagonist. A human woman, Lisa, approaches him and convinces him to teach her about science. He agrees and falls in love with her. Lisa seeks to bridge the worlds of humans and vampires, advocating for peace and mutual understanding. And then she is killed by fearful and ignorant peasants, led by a bishop of the church. This shatters Dracula's belief in the possibility of coexistence, pushing him toward a path of revenge. And although his son, who we'll get to, tries to convince Dracula to only act against those responsible for Lisa's death, Dracula refuses and goes to war against all of humanity, his rage fueled by his profound grief at the loss of his wife. This background provides Dracula with a believable reason for his actions, transforming him from a caricature of evil into a character with depth and understandable motives, even though he's misguided. Like he says, "You take my wife and deny I even exist?" We might not approve of his actions, but we can understand them. The same applies to his two human generals, Isaac and Hector, who have their own tragic backstories. But grey villains alone don't make a story dark fantasy. Heroes too need their darker stripes, and so let's turn to Trevor Belmont. Trevor Belmont, scion of a disgraced family of monster hunters, represents the grey hero perfectly. His family had dedicated their lives to fighting creatures of darkness, commanded by Lord Dracula, and they were there to protect mankind. However, rumors spread that the Belmont clan practiced black magic, because of course they did. The rumors, I mean, not that they practiced black magic. Anyway, rumors spread, because of course they did. And that caused the family to be exiled and excommunicated by the church. Naturally. So everything the family owned was razed and destroyed. This left Trevor cynical toward both humanity in general and the church specifically. When we meet him, he picks a bar fight. He then travels to Gresset, where he sees an old man accosted by priests. At first, Trevor wants to walk away. He tries to convince himself to walk away, but he can't, and that reluctantly, very reluctantly, drags him into the conflict in Gresset, where the speakers are being blamed for the demon attack caused by Dracula. Trevor wants to still walk away, but the speakers convince him to attempt to find the grandchild of the elder of the speakers, who is searching for the sleeping soldier beneath Gresset. We'll get more into what happens there in a moment, but first, let's talk about Trevor's role in the story in general. He uses questionable methods, but there is no doubt that his heart is in the right place, despite his cynicism. His attitude is abrasive and don't care, but he is committed to fighting for what he believes to be right. Figuring out what he believes to be right is the complex part, and that is what makes his character appropriate for dark fantasy, and a very interesting character. So let's get back to our quest that Trevor undertakes and his attempt to find the speaker tribe's child. And this leads us to the second hero, Sifia Belnadis. With his cat-like reflexes, Trevor falls into the catacombs beneath Gresset and there fights a cyclop, rescuing the speaker elder's grandchild, Sifia. She pushes him to investigate further and find the sleeping soldier, which is a myth of some messiah sleeping under Gresset. She and the other speakers refuse to run from the priest who is whipping up the people of Gresset against the speakers. Trevor makes the speakers hide and confronts the mob. When he is exhausted and surrounded by the mob, Sifia rescues him with magic, casting a ring of fire. After this, the demons attack in full. Trevor and Sifia, with the help of a true priest to make holy water, help the people of Gresset fight the demons. And after they defeat the boss monster, the two of them fall down into the catacombs. Cat-like reflexes, I tell you. And we'll speak about who they find there in a moment. But first, let's talk about Sifia's role in the narrative. She is a powerful magician and scholar who starts with a relatively black and white view of the world, believing in her mission to protect humanity at all costs. However, as she travels with Trevor and encounters the harsh realities of their world, her perspective begins to shift. She witnesses the cruelty and ignorance of those she aims to save, causing her to question the nature of her journey. Her idealism is tempered by the recognition of humanity's flaws, adding layers to her character as she grapples with the disillusionment that comes with knowledge and experience. Now that we have a firm grasp on our idealist who slowly grows jaded, let's talk about our third hero that they find down in the catacombs. In the catacombs, Trevor and Sophia tumble into a tomb, and the coffin lid opens to reveal a blonde vampire. Sophia is convinced he's the sleeping soldier of legend, the savior of humanity. Trevor is convinced he's a vampire and wants to kill him. This gives us an amazing fight between Alucard and Trevor, ending with them in a life and death situation, with Trevor half staking Alucard and Alucard threatening to rip Trevor's throat out. Trevor says an amazing line here. Killing you was the point. Living through it is just a luxury. Which is more or less what Alucard wanted to hear in this conversation. We learned that he co-opted the legend of the sleeping soldier, and he's been waiting for people like Sophia and Trevor because he is Dracula's son and he wants to defeat his father. And when Trevor asks Alucard why, he says, "Because my mother would have wanted that. We are all, in the end, slaves to our family's wishes." Alucard embodies the conflict between human and vampire love and hatred. His decision to stand against his father is a testament to his moral complexity and the inner turmoil he experiences. Torn between his love for his mother and his heritage, Alucard's journey is one of self-discovery and redemption. He fights to prevent his father's vengeance, yet he understands the pain that drives Dracula. This duality makes Alucard a fascinating character as he navigates his identity and the legacy of both his parents, striving to forge his own path while dealing with the weight of his familial bonds. As you can see, all of our characters are grey, with Dracula being the darkest grey, shading to black. And yet, all of them have redeeming features that makes the audience feel for them, even Dracula. These characters navigate a world where moral absolutes are questioned, and the distinction between good and evil is blurred. Their complex backgrounds and the personal journeys they undertake add depth to the narrative, inviting the audience to explore the nuanced landscape of dark fantasy, where heroes and villains alike grapple with the consequences of their actions and what goodness means. Now that we understand the shades of grey that is required in the characters, let's talk about the second key element of dark fantasy: terrible choices. In Season 3 of Castlevania, the theme of terrible choices is epitomized through Alucard's painful decision involving Taka and Sumi, two characters who deeply impact his journey. This scenario is pivotal, highlighting the complex morality and the burdens that characters in dark fantasy narratives often bear. It illustrates not just a moment of conflict, but a profound exploration of trust, betrayal, and the loneliness that accompanies power and responsibility. Taka and Sumi are vampire hunters from Japan who seek out Alucard with the hope of learning from him. They are survivors of vampire enslavement, driven by a strong desire to prevent others from suffering the same fate. To Alucard, whose existence has been marked by isolation and loss, Taka and Sumi represent a glimmer of hope, not just for companionship, but for a purpose. Teaching them, sharing his knowledge and his home becomes a way to honor his parents' legacy, particularly his mother's vision of a world where humans and vampires coexist peacefully. However, Taka and Sumi's trust in Alucard begins to wane as they grow impatient and suspicious. They come to believe that Alucard is withholding knowledge, keeping secrets that could be vital to their cause. This mistrust escalates into a confrontation where Taka and Sumi attempt to kill Alucard, convinced that this act is necessary to access the full extent of his powers and secrets. For Alucard, the betrayal is not just a personal affront, but a shattering of the fragile hope he had nurtured, that he could find kinship, purpose, and perhaps redemption in mentoring these two. Faced with the betrayal of Taka and Sumi, Alucard is forced into an impossible choice. To protect himself and what he stands for, he kills them in self-defense. This act, though necessary for his survival, deeply affects Alucard. It's not just about the loss of life, but the loss of trust, the fading hope for connection, and the heavy burden of his legacy. The decision to take their lives while made in a moment of crisis leaves a lasting scar on Alucard's psyche, reinforcing his isolation and pushing him further towards cynicism and despair. In the aftermath, Alucard is left to grapple with the consequences of his decision. He positions Taka and Sumi's bodies on pikes outside the castle as a grim warning to others, mirroring his father's darker impulses. This act signifies a pivotal moment in Alucard's narrative, a surrender to the solitude and bitterness he had fought against. It's a visual and emotional testament to the terrible choices characters in dark fantasies are often compelled to make, highlighting the genre's exploration of the darker aspects of the human condition and the complexities of power and morality. Sometimes there are no good choices. Of course, these no-win situations are set up and highlighted by the environment and the atmosphere of horror, which is the last element that forms the three-legged pillar that holds up the dark fantasy genre. So let's talk about creating an atmosphere of horror. In order to create the right dark fantasy atmosphere, Castlevania leverages the following techniques. 1. Nowhere is safe. Castlevania subverts traditional notions of safety associated with sacred spaces. The moment the demons invade the church and confronts the bishop in Gresset is a stark reminder of this subversion. In fantasy, churches and holy places are often seen as refuges against evil, but in Castlevania, they are no longer safe. This invasion not only heightens the atmosphere of horror, but also deepens the thematic exploration of faith and its complexities within this series. Think about the words the demon says to the priest at that point. Your God's love is not conditional. He does not love us, and he does not love you. Those words shatters all illusions of any place being safe. To replicate this in storytelling, consider how conventional havens can be twisted into places of vulnerability, challenging the characters and the reader's preconceptions about safety and sanctity, and keeping that sense of dread ever present. The second technique is the power of suggestion. Castlevania employs the power of suggestion to evoke horror, a technique that can be incredibly effective in written form as well. By focusing on characters' reactions to unseen horrors or the aftermath of a violent attack, the series leaves much to the imagination, and often this is more frightening than anything explicitly shown. In that death scene of the bishop, all we see is his feet and the blood spilling, We don't see the final kill shot of the demon. And you can replicate this in writing by leveraging the power of suggestion through a character's sensory experience. What they hear, smell, and feel. This can create a visceral horror that resonates deeply with readers. This method draws them into the scene, allowing their imagination to fill in the gaps with more terrifying imagery than you could explicitly describe. And technique number 3, the horror of personal tragedy. Castlevania doesn't shy away from personal tragedies and their psychological impact, weaving them into the broader tapestry of horror. Characters like Dracula, who is driven to genocidal wrath by the loss of his wife, present a deeply personal form of this kind of horror, one that stems from grief and loss rather than from his monstrous nature. The heroes, too, experience this kind of grief and loss and the horror of losing those close to them. And incorporating those kinds of personal tragedies into your dark fantasy narrative can add a profound layer that resonates on a more intimate level with the audience, making the fantastical horrors seem all the more real and relatable. Indeed, the heart of Castlevania for me is captured when Alucard weeps in the solitude of the castle after killing his father. That is his tragedy. He won. He saved humanity. But to do it, he had to kill his father. This moment, profound and raw, reminds us that even in tales of darkness, there is humanity and pain and perhaps redemption. But having sung its praises, Castlevania is not all great. And in Season 4, the pacing stumbles. While ambitious, the story in Season 4 feels rushed, leaving the narrative threads like the death storyline feeling unearned. It feels like death came out of nowhere and the destruction didn't really work for me. This highlights a common pitfall in dark fantasy, the delicate balance between a satisfying conclusion and maintaining the genre's essence. So let's talk about the problem with dark fantasy and endings. In dark fantasy, with its morally grey villains and heroes, crafting a satisfying conclusion presents unique challenges. The heroes and the villains blend together, and the writer wants to give a concluding ending, but at the same time he wants to retain the dark fantasy feel, and still he doesn't want to kill their sympathetic villains. But someone has to lose in the end, and in dark fantasy it's not clear who the audience should root for. And so, creating an ending that is really satisfying to the audience is hard. I think the way to combat this is to understand what theme you're trying to express. If your theme is that good can win, but at a high cost, then you need to give your audience the win, but the cost of victory should be very high. Castlevania failed here. Trevor sacrificed himself to defeat death in the end, and then it turns out that was a fake out and he comes back to life, which in my opinion was just a cop-out. Don't do that. If the cost of victory is a life, then the cost is a life. So be it. But high costs might not be your theme. Let's say that your theme is good can win, but it's always temporary. In that case, give the heroes the win, but in their victory, the audience should be able to see the seeds of future evil already laying the groundwork. Keep this ambiguous though. Let the audience have their closure with just a sense that the wheel grinds on and evil will return. But of course, you might be going full-bore dark fantasy, and your theme is that evil wins. well, then you're writing a tragedy and you need to lean into that. The tragic end of all your heroes is how this tale concludes. Finding the right ending for a dark fantasy story is about staying true to the story's thematic heart and the complex world it inhabits. It's about navigating the fine line between resolution and ambiguity, ensuring that the conclusion reflects the story's depth and the genre's nuanced exploration of darkness and light. By focusing on theme, embracing moral complexity, and acknowledging the cost of characters' journeys, you can craft endings that resonate with the essence of the dark fantasy genre. This genre leaves us with lasting impressions, not just of the horror and the battles, but of the characters' journeys amidst the darkness. It's in the resolution that we find closure, not just for the narrative, but for the themes and the moral quandaries it explores. Have you enjoyed any dark fantasy stories? Have you watched Castlevania or any of the other dark fantasy sagas? How about the Dark Souls video games or Elden Ring? Share your favorite dark fantasies in the comments below. If this video does well, I'll make more videos on genre-specific world building, so if you liked it, share it far and wide. And this episode was brought to you by my epic fantasy series, which definitely has a dark side. One of the main heroes is, after all, an assassin. If you'd like to support the channel and check out a good epic fantasy series, follow the links down below to learn more about Sangwheel Chronicles. But please, don't feel pressured to support the channel financially. You could also show your support just by watching another video. Since you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy my video on urban fantasy world building, or you can trust the algorithm with its recommendation right over there. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building, where we build what we need when we need it.